Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the PixelCast. I am Jeremy Lessie, founder of PixelFest, and tonight I am joined by Jay Moore, the only guy ever to leave a positive accolade on my LinkedIn page. Thank you so much, Jay. And of course, Jay was involved with Garage Games back in the early 2000s, maybe even 1999. Garage Games is the company that basically created the indie game movement as we know it. I think they coined the term indie games. How's it going tonight, Jay? And is that correct?
Yeah, actually, it sounds today like I'm trying to make it up, but yeah, when we launched Indie Gamescon in 2002, that was the first time that we could find that indie games had been used commercially. So we could have trademarked it.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting down with everybody and we said, "Oh no, that it should be public domain. That nobody should own that." And there's a point where I think, gosh, if we just owned it, we could have managed what indie games was for a minute. But it's all turned out great now. But there was a period of time where it was like bad student games were indie games.
Right. Yes. Or shareware, right? You said at the time it was all known as shareware.
Yeah. That's what everybody was doing. That were independent developers trying to bring stuff to market. They were kind of under this group of shareware developers, and there was some interesting stuff at that time too. I mean, you go back to Epic and a bunch of others, and they started there, right?
Yep. Yeah, shareware. And the thing is, I mean, it all sort of was part and parcel because Garage Games was created because of garage bands. And of course, there was an indie rock scene, indie music scene. And so the whole idea was to say, well, wait a minute. If there's an indie rock scene, why can't there be an indie game scene? And that was basically what the founders of Garage Games were trying to get across.
Yeah, and the whole idea that, GarageBand from Apple came out a while down the road after that, but what we were doing really was at the core of how do we get this art to market, and the engine actually we went through a couple names on that before we ended up at Torque, but it was the catalyst, because at that time it was $1 million to license a AAA game engine for one game, and we said, if the studios own all the cameras, just like in the 50s in Hollywood, nobody will be able to have indie film either. Mm-hmm. So we really felt like getting the tools into the hands of the artist was like, I think for us that was our passion. It really was it wasn't just we never really did it well for profit. We were always a passion approach to things, even though it did turn out successful. We were doing it because we felt like it had to be done.
Oh, yeah. It was a mission-driven company, totally. I was so taken up with the whole endeavor. I think Jeff Donnell had put up a blog, and he had this story about how when the previous company, I guess, had been sold to Ken and Roberta Roberts, so it was Dynamics, I guess, was sold.
Yep.
They had the company. They were gracious people, great people, but eventually they decided they wanted to sell their company, and I guess what happened was it ended up in like a New York sort of financial chop shop, and basically he said, hey, all the suits got golden parachutes, and all the people who love making games, just got the door. They got kicked out, and that was sort of the end. And he wrote this blog that described it, I think, much better. But
he didn't. I don't think, and we called it a debt diary back then. I think blogs were.
Yeah, we didn't have blogs yet. That's right.
Yeah, and
it was called a dot.
Oh
wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was called a dot something. I forgot.
Dot diary or dot. Anyway, one of the things, and a bunch of people went to prison out of the Sierra thing.
Oh wow.
Because it really did. Well, it went rogue at one point. But again, I think that's been one of the challenges we've seen in game development, as well as we experienced that in the educational technology space, where Sierra bought Davidson and the Learning Company and Broderbund and all those companies got rolled up, and you get them in a big enough corporate environment, and there are rounding errors on the balance, on the P&L, so
right.
they're not compelling sectors of what was like a very vibrant, whole aisle in Costco at one point, and we watched that happen a number of times. My first game that I got to work on was called The Incredible Machine, and they called me in when it had gotten delisted the second time from retail, which means you can't even back order it. You can't even go from the backlist and order it because it had such a high return rate because nobody could figure out what this game was. It was a physics puzzle game, right?
That was an incredible game, that wasn't it? I mean, The Incredible Machine, but
yeah,
that was like, it's like a legendary game at this point, I feel like.
Yeah, it's a Minecraft. Yeah, no, it's in the top 10 of all in the history of educational technology games, learning game. And I came in and got the opportunity to do the curriculum to take it into the schools. And once kids played it in the labs, around the country, then the sales. I mean, it was a $4.5 million category creator for Sierra, so it was an amazing success story. But it was one of those ones where you could only get it by playing it. You couldn't get it by looking at a box.
Right.
It wasn't like tennis or Scrabble or something. It just wasn't something you could figure out by looking at.
It was kind of a Rube Goldberg machine type deal, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Matter of fact, of the 150 different, what do you want to call them, knockoffs that have happened to Incredible Machine, Rube Goldberg, the foundation actually did a game themselves that I found at Makers Faire a few years back.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
But Nintendo knocked it off. Everybody, it really did start a genre. And actually, Jeff started a lot of genres. He started the horror genre. He started, a number of things that were just first fishing game ever. Of course,
I didn't know that one. I knew about the horror game. I read about that, but
well, the next year they wanted him to make a hunting game. He says, "Who wants to make a hunting game? That's just boring. Nobody has fun sitting there waiting." And so, for all the wins, we sometimes are blind to the other opportunities.
Yeah. So you were at Dynamics before Garage Games then, and what year did you join Dynamics?
So that's the story unto itself. I never actually did join Dynamics because at the time I owned a design firm, and they had the policy at Sierra because I came in after Sierra had bought Dynamics that they owned your thoughts and dreams in their employment contract, and I couldn't sign that because I already leased them out to other clients.
Right.
And so I worked for what was kind of a famous company because they got taken to court where Microsoft would outsource their middle management to this company, and they would contract, and that's how I worked with Dynamics was through a third party.
Okay.
And I actually became a brand manager. I think I got the reputation of taking on any of projects that Jeff was passionate about that just couldn't find anybody in marketing that wanted them. Because I did driver's education and took that into it was the first cause marketing game, which was a learning game.
Okay.
Where you learned how to drive on computer, but we gave 1.5% back to Mothers Against Drunk Driving because we had a drunk driving simulator in it.
Oh wow!
And so that was something Sierra had never done before. We wrote these big checks, and I ended up sitting on the board of MAD for a couple of years.
Wow, man, you've got so many great stories to tell. I'm so glad I got you on here. I was trying to get up with you on LinkedIn for a while, and man, I knew this would be good. Gosh. So, and for those sort of watching that are in the PixelFest community, I got my start. I was making games a little bit before Garage Games, but essentially these are the guys that gave me my first published game. And it was Jeff Tennell, who was like a mentor to me, helped walk me through this game, Aerial Antics. Jay, helped me do a lot of the branding and all that. Jay is very good at branding. I can actually tell this story now. I could bring this in. The logo that you see in the background is the first Garage Games logo, and a lot of people in the Garage Games community were very passionate about this logo. Unfortunately, it breaks a lot of the marketing rules. Like, a logo should be dynamic enough that you can change its color, that you can invert the colors, you can do all sorts of things, and this logo couldn't necessarily accomplish those things, although people like myself in the community, we had just fallen in love with it, and I think that's really, we had fallen in love with the mission-driven statement of this company. But I'm going to go ahead and pop this other logo up because Jay and I were talking about it. So now in the upper left-hand corner, you can see the logo that Jay and his wife, actually, through their design company, I guess, had created this logo. Or maybe you were at Garage Games, but either way, they did this logo.
I was at Garage Games. She was still running the agency. And,
okay.
And, that and the Torque logo we got to work on. And it was an interesting client because I was the client and she was the designer, and yet we still had Jeff and the rest of the team that had to be and you never get a great logo designed by committee,
right?
You really do have to have somebody who has a vision for it. And I think that the exciting part about that was it gave an homage to the existing identity that we had, but kind of took it to a more polished brand that we could build a publishing company and could have the game engine underneath it and everything else.
Definitely,
we were working on there.
Putting them side by side, I can really see the difference. I remember being like, "Oh, the old logo," but no, the new one is a better logo. And man, wow!
Yeah, I was a real fan of Paul Rand. I don't know if you've come across him, but he has like the 7 laws of good logos, and one of the hardest ones to get is scalability.
Right.
I used to back in the day fax a business card size of the logo to just see if it would hold up, because a lot of times you'd look at it and go, oh yeah, that's not gonna, you're not gonna be able to stitch that, you're not gonna be able to put it on a wall and have it compete with other identities.
Right.
So it was important to get something that was readable at all font sizes, and that's still something that people want. A lot of detail in their logo because they want a lot of story to be told, but the problem is you have to be in just the perfect optics for it. And the web is actually a big thinning of good logos from bad, because if it doesn't work on the web, it's not gonna be a good flag for your company.
Right. Yeah, you could probably do a I don't know, just like a whole course probably on this type of marketing. Blow people away.
I think the identity piece of it, the ability to get and I've been doing a series that I've done at conferences about community, especially from the experiences I had at Garage Games, because the thing that really made Garage Games what it was the community that built it, and it wasn't the employees of the matter of fact, of the interns who were associates first and then flew out for a summer and stayed in 5 or 6 people to an old house.
Yep.
They really, the most successful ones came up as associates, which I remember for the longest time we'd sit around and go, yeah, we haven't ever really defined what an associate is. We just kind of anoint them. Different people contributed different ways.
Right.
So, it would be like making the Linux build a Torque, or somebody else would be, running. What was that MMO that we were building? Shoot.
There's so many games coming out of there.
Running the code base for the MMO, and there was just a lot. There were a lot of ways that people would find, and it was before we had a lot of context around open source. So it really had those same kind of dynamics. Although we controlled the head and decided what went into the engine, a lot of people contributed to that.
For sure,
which was exciting.
The community was incredible for Garage Games. Everybody was just so excited about this, and for people that don't know, since I talk to a lot of people that don't know about Garage Games now, they just think maybe it was Unity or Unreal or whatever. But yeah, basically I think there was Independent Games Festival, but it wasn't called Indie Games Festival or anything like that. It was Independent Games Festival. It was in I think 1999, the first one, right? Or was it 98? 98 or 99?
No, actually, Indie Games Con was 2002.
Or not Indie Games Con, but the Independent Games Festival, the one that's.
Yes, there was an Independent Games Festival. Yeah.
And I think that was I think that was 99, which was basically the same time Garage Games got started. It was 98 or 99, right. But nobody was saying indie games. They weren't doing this whole like indie rock band, Garage Games thing.
Right.
But Garage Games came around right around that same time. But yeah, there was no access to game development technology, or very little. What was out there was essentially basic programming languages, things like Dark Basic, which was at the same time anyway. But it was Garage Games that said, hey, we made this AAA game called Tribes that you all saw. You know, you could go to Babbage's, or, you know, I don't know if GameStop was around yet, but you could go to Babbage's or Electronics Boutique and buy this game off the shelf, which I did. And here's this AAA, you know, networked 128 players per server, you know, game engine that, like you said, it was $1 million to get that engine per game at the time. And Garage Games said, hey, it's going to be $100. I mean, and this was the first time that ever happened.
Yeah, and you know, the thing that's still, like, you know, now we have it with Unreal and others, but Unity still hasn't done it, and that's that we available source the code, because to build a game, and it's still true on consoles and places where you need optimization, you've got to be able to get to the metal and optimize for performance, because there'll be things, if you're really pushing any kind of genre or trying to adapt it, you really have to be able to get down to the source code and work on that. You're just not going to get it with, you know, with an exe, and that for us was philosophically a core piece of it. You know, we needed to have the source available, and we needed to have it at a price that anybody could afford it. I still remember going to a big military show back in Orlando called ITSEC. It still goes on today. And we walked around the floor, and there were literally 20 different exhibitors showing demonstrations of different simulations and different things running on the indie version, the independent license of the engine, which, you know, any commercial use had a $10,000 licensing fee, because we thought that was just the minimum you needed to be able to pay if you're going to go make a third-party commercial use of this.
Right.
And so we'd had that very clear. But all the people were just using it for the indie license.
Everybody just get it, $100. Yeah, let's go get a government contract now.
NASA, a bunch of big names, like, you know, we're in there, and some of them did. We didn't send out any attorney letters, but we certainly let them know that they were not in compliance with our licensing.
Right. Yeah, and you can see on the screen in the background here, the people that are watching this can see the Torque logo, the Torque Game Engine logo with. And this might be this is an older logo too, I think. This is probably the original one. Says Torque. It's got the little arrow going around and like the sun going around like a polygonal shape. Yeah. The Torque engine was really... When I got into Torque, I had used... I programmed games on my calculator, a TI-85 in BASIC. I think I had done some basic programming on either an Apple II or an IBM PC, like in school, like way back. But the first game I ever made was on my calculator. Then I moved on to making games with Dark Basic, and then I went to Blitz 3D, which was a really great tool.
Yeah.
Loved that tool, and that's what Aerial Antics was made with. And I think it was the first Aerial Antics. I think was the 11th or 12th game that you all had published, and it was the first two that were made with other engines. There was a Mahjong game that was made with Dark Basic. And then there was Aerial Antics that was made with Blitz. And so those are like the first games y'all published that didn't use the engine from Garage Games. But after doing that, I had then moved over to the Torque engine and started working. I developed a lot of, I think, prototypes mainly with Torque. I'm trying to think I think with Torque 2D, there was a couple of games that I put together that I put on sale and stuff. But
Torque 2D definitely, I mean, part of the challenge with a AAA game engine, and this was true even Unreal and others that people were licensing back then, is that they really didn't have, Unity. I remember first time I was in WWDC, the Worldwide Developers Conference with Apple, and was about to go on stage, and I see this demo of a game engine going on, and I walk over, and I'm watching people just drag the art right into the game. And there it works. And it was like, I got on the phone within 10 minutes of seeing this, and I said, there is a engine killer it's really early. It's in its prototype phase. But if we can't make it this simple to use,
Right.
we're gonna be out of this thing over time. And even David Helgeson will tell you that they were inspired by the fact that, heck, they knew they could get at least $1,500 for a license when we were charging $100,
Right.
and still make good money.
Yeah.
And of course, what's their 3.2 billion valuation now, or whatever? 4.2.
I think they're up to $6 billion
Keeps going
now,
up.
something like that. They're gonna.
Yeah. Well, I mean, since John came on board to try and IPO them, I've lost track of and yeah, I admit I miss Helgeson and their passion behind that. That it lost something through its days as well. But again, we inspired the Unity game engine and
Yep.
to look at a different way to make it easier for people to make games. And I think that was key with the Torque 2D thing, is that we really were making it so that you didn't have to have 3D modeling and all the different pieces that a team making a larger game required. That was kind of past the scope of what that was always the problem. People were trying to make these huge multi-million-dollar scoped games.
Yep.
with two guys in a garage, and it was like, the art on that alone is going to cost you. We were always dealing with the scope issue, and we struggled with it ourselves. I mean, with Marble Blast and some of the ones that we worked on, keeping it to a simple enough play experience and level building and the rest of it that we could actually polish up and get fun.
Marble Blast.
I love to tell. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying that. So Marble Blast ended up being a pretty big success, and yes, some people might look at that and think, hey, compared to the Xbox 360 games, it might have been next to by the time it reached live arcade. Although there were many versions sort of coming up to that point, but still, you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, you had at least 100 levels in the first version of it. I think at some point there were hundreds of levels. And to get every one of those levels to be a polished experience, to look good, to look different, to be challenging from a design standpoint is something that's very difficult to do.
I tell this story, and I have a hard time sometimes when people think that they can just hit a punch list and get fun at the end of a game development cycle.
Yes.
And I always feel like Marble Blast illustrated this the best, because we were Marble Madness. There were certainly known play mechanic and in an homage that we knew that there was a fun physics piece if we could get the ball rolling right and the rest of it. And at the time, we'd actually had to have a company-wide meeting at one point, because we were pretty lax. There were no milestone dates and all that. If we got it done. Matter of fact, Indie Gamescom became the thing that we had to finish stuff to show.
Get it done by the show.
It was one of the few deliverables that we ever had. But Marble Blast was running into a problem because it just wasn't. People weren't even showing up, and Friday afternoon was mandatory play. Make a build and play it, because if you don't make a build, frequently you don't find your bugs until it's buried for a while. So we were really religious about that. But people weren't even wanting to play it. And at the time, we'd had this company-wide meeting because everybody was playing Mario Kart and not going back to work. So we had these, we had all these tournaments going on, and the scream factor in the building. Nobody could get any work done. Everybody was playing Mario Kart, and I'd had it. I heard everybody screaming, and I came out, and I was just ready to light into somebody, and they were playing Marble Blast.
Oh!
and it wasn't Mario Kart. And the trash talking and the rest of it, and that was the tipping point where it went from being, man, there's another bug, to being really fun.
Okay.
And after that point, the magic was there, and we had to work to not lose that, not to cruff it up, as I like to say, and start adding features until it's, you lose that essence. And
it's a tricky
and that
thing.
happened a lot too. When people would bring stuff to IGC, we'd like say, wait a second, I remember playing the prototype. That used to be fun. What happened? And
what'd you do to it?
The fun out of it. It's like, and Orbs ran into that.
I loved Orbs. One of my favorite games of all time.
Yeah, it certainly was the closest to my heart. because I could win at it.
I got number one in the world.
I was okay at thing tanks, but I could actually compete with orbs. No, it was the 21-6 guys, but they were making that mech game, and it.
Was that the Horizons lore?
Yeah, lore.
Okay.
No, that's Adrian and his team. Anyway, so there were a number of occasions where the challenge of getting it to scope and making sure that you found the soul of the game, as it were, that was the true fun factor, and were chose to not let that ever get lost, was a really important challenge for those independent developers at the beginning, because it seemed like, if you're just knocking off another game, it was easy, but if you're making truly unique new IP, you had to find that essence.
Yeah.
And I think that was, for me, the thing that made Aerial Antics stand out the most was it had a unique play experience, and you guys, it kind of had a little bit of that skiing effect that was in Tribes, but it was its own play experience, and it was unique, and you stuck true to that. And I think even though it didn't have the art budget that it deserved to get to that look, it certainly had the commercial criteria of fun, and the length of gameplay. People just continue to play that game, which that's always, as we've seen with everything from Niantic's project where we got a great game, but it just didn't have the end game as far as length of gameplay.
Okay. Man, I appreciate you saying that about Aerial Antics, though. That
Pokemon Go.
Working something I try to sort of pass this along to indies from time to time, because I've been doing this now. I'm like, oh yeah, I've been making games for like 25 years. But when I made that game, I couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. Drove myself crazy. Would stay up all night. Would work on the game till 5 a.m. Would wake up at 7 a.m. to go to work. Just driving myself nuts trying to figure out what can I do to this game to make it sell, right? To get it to be a commercial success. People bought it, but it was nowhere what I thought what I was doing would what it would translate to. You're working on this game, you're like, cool, this is going to translate to a living. And, I'm like, oh, great, I can go, on a date night once a week or something like that, selling this game. I'm not buying a new car or whatever. And, a lot of indies, I think they get caught up on the magnitude sometimes too often. And it is probably more a matter of the direction of the creativity rather than the magnitude of the execution of the game. But the direction does have to be the right direction for the time. And that's the tricky thing, because there's an infinite number of directions that one can choose,
Well, especially when you add community to that mix. I think about Blockland. I don't remember.
Yes, I was just thinking about that game yesterday.
And it was before Minecraft was ever even conceptualized. And I remember coming in. It's actually over the weekend, and I looked at how many servers had been tipped up for this Blockland game, and it was like just insane, and it was just going crazy.
Yep.
And obviously it had hit a chord, and the guy that was behind it didn't want to see it go that way. It wasn't what he was trying to do, and so he kind of I remember you could go in to other people's servers and knock down their blocks, so it was you could knock over everybody else's construction, and he didn't want people to be able to have that, so he locked it down. And I, to this day, not that I don't think Blockland is a great game, Ben Garney put a lot of energy into it. It had that seed that was starting to blossom,
right?
And it's really hard to know when to listen to the community and how to let your baby grow, at the same time when not to listen to the community, when you know, they can be completely wrong,
Right.
and that's a hard thing for a designer to know, and really, and you know, it's there isn't any formula for it.
Could
But there,
Blockland have been Minecraft?
oh, it was going to be Minecraft,
Right? Because
I
that's
think.
what I was thinking about. I was like, man, he made
Yeah.
what was his name? Was it Eric or
Eric is his first name.
his name was Eric?
And
Okay.
yeah, and I but maybe not, because it didn't have the voxels that were easy for anybody to go in and build levels. But I think it was already getting some of that kind of energy.
It had like a gun, like you
and
could shoot the bricks, right? And they would look,
Mhm.
they kind of looked like Lego bricks. And then there was
That
a deal. Was there a deal with Lego on that?
There's another story in there where he got an offer from Lego at one point too.
Okay.
But, yeah. And again, I think that the challenge is, you have to be true to yourself. You have to be an artist to a degree, but then finding that commercial moment where you can see it start to move. I mean, Marvel Blast's actual success wasn't the first multiplayer on Xbox Live Arcade, although that was what made us the millions at the end.
Right.
It was getting an OEM deal with Apple where we were going to be on their on every Mac for a month, or no, a quarter. We're going to be on every Mac for a quarter.
Yeah.
And it was pennies. They normally would spend a dime per unit.
Okay.
And that particular quarter, they were bringing in not just Marvel Blast, but another title, and they wanted to give us a nickel, and I said, wait a second, we at least deserve 7 cents. She says, well, you can take it or leave it. And I said 8 cents. She said, you can take it or leave it. 5 cents is what I got for you, Jay. And I said, well, this is the senior buyer for OEM stuff at Apple. And I said, well, what about 7? She said, okay.
Nice. Hey, way to negotiate.
Those 2 pennies, we ended up being on there for like 12 or 14 quarters, and it was the highest selling period of time in Macintosh history. They're so busy they never changed the game that was running on OEM, and that's what made Mike actually kept Garage Games in business. It was the revenue from that deal.
Wow.
Because of the millions of deals, and
Max, they were selling.
That was, I don't know that story gets told. I don't know if we've already gotten into that much, but it's an exciting one where, yes, it was a good game, but it wasn't like we had huge distributions. We were on Real Arcade and Yahoo and a few other groups that were publishing games at the time, but we were too big of a game for them. Our download was too big, and it was
right. Yeah, it wasn't the traditional casual
it wasn't
game.
The traditional casual title, and so we weren't fitting the mold.
The thing I remember sales figures wise was Jeff gave a speech where he said we made, I think, $200,000 from this game in 18 months. I think something like that. That was the one early. That was before Live Arcade and all that. So
yeah,
that was sort of at the beginning of the company.
Just selling it off of our website, and I think we were getting like 35% of the sales off of real networks and those sorts. And,
yeah, you all think you have bad at 70% now. Go look back in the day. It was like 15 to 35%. You were lucky to get 35%.
Yeah, well, and nobody had reach. Nobody had distribution. Where you were getting a whole lot of sales. So it didn't add up to. So yeah, it was a lot of work to get that couple $100K, and so yeah, getting an OEM deal really was the delta for.
So then that OEM deal was after the $200K. So that wasn't
included in that. Yeah, no, because we weren't doing deals, because Jeff at that time was using that as an expression of this is the potential you'd have, using our publishing platform,
right,
to bring a game to market. And there were times when think tanks and there were a couple others.
I always liked that game. Think tanks. There was a critter. What was the critter? Critter tennis. I played all those games.
Yeah. And we tried and actually I came on to Garage Games trying to get Chain Reaction, which was a remake of that Jeff wanted to do in 3D of the Incredible Machine.
Okay.
And it worked in 2D, but it was very complex to try and put these 3D puzzles together because, you know, not only did they need to be kind of pixel perfect in the plane, but once you added the Z-axis, you really had an issue with trying to place these objects, and it was painful. It wasn't fun
Right.
to play this expression in 3D, and that was something where I think we learned a lot of this in mobile, but how many things work in 2D that just were, sprite-based stuff that we kind of lost sight of in the early 90s, when we went to more 3D games.
3D is very compelling, but it does complicate the mechanics and at times can make the games less fun. It's an interesting trade-off. I think technically it's very compelling.
The art's more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Just there's a lot of things that it takes a bigger scope and a larger team to pull a 3D game off as well. I
love 3D games. So I did Swapfire that we shipped. Our team shipped that in 2016. That's really the last full game that I shipped on Nintendo Wii U. 3D game, mm-hmm. And I'm just thinking to myself now, I really should make a 2D version of this game. I think is where it's going to go, because that game was not successful enough on its own to create a sequel. Really want to create a sequel. There's so much I wanted to do with it. So much I wanted to, explore with the concept and, blow it up. But thinking along those lines, I'm like, well, if I did a 2D version of this game, it'd still be fun, and it might actually sell better because you can get a higher degree of polish when you're just focused on those two dimensions as an independent developer. So,
well, and one of the things that I believe would be a tipping point in how games get experienced, because making games is such a fun game, was that user-generated content would, like with Roblox and even the kind of stuff you saw with Minecraft, where the actual stuff in the game was built by the players themselves, and especially if you can find a way to help them monetize it,
mm-hmm.
that's the magic. And I've been thinking that Steam Workshop would take off and be a huge vector for people to. But as soon as you get into 3D art, it becomes a much more complex thing to be able to have what I would consider semi-pro or amateur game developers actually make fun content in it. It takes the bar up substantially, and we've seen that with the modding communities and how difficult it is. Partly because publishers try to close that stuff down in many cases, but also just it takes so much talent to be able to pull off a great mod.
Mm-hmm.
I keep thinking if the platform was there to support it, and you had a simple enough art pipeline, you could see more of those types of opportunities. I was just in a voxel one called the Sandbox the other day, and it's built on the Ethereum blockchain backend,
nice.
And I can see some magic there. It's still it's still early, but I could see that actually becoming a platform.
That's very interesting. Now, this is a subject that's really interesting to me because of Super Mario Maker. A couple years ago when we were working on Swapfire, we made a Mario Maker fan site because with the first version for Wii U, there was really no good way to share and categorize levels. So we created MarioMade.com as a way for us to get in direct contact with Nintendo Wii U owners so that we could market our game to them. And it actually became a pretty good-sized community. We got thousands of people signed up for this thing. But when you look at Super Mario Maker, and you could almost look at it like you look at the AAA game market, and we used to have games, maybe a couple of games a month coming out. And then it's like you got to like iOS, let's say, and all of a sudden you had dozens of games coming out. And Steam, kind of the same thing. Yeah, even thousands now. I don't know what it is. But you look at something like Mario Maker at the time that we were doing that, you have really like so many levels being generated every day by the community. And so it seems that somebody is going to create a game experience like that, a user-generated game development platform. Now, there is something I just saw in the news today, something called Core, which is built on top of the Unreal Engine that's supposed to be that thing, like a game development tool for the community to use, but it does look three-dimensional. And it's the
Yeah.
Unreal Engine, which I think makes 3D, maybe makes your 3D look a little bit better, just sort of by default. But to me, it still seems that somebody needs to take the idea of Mario Maker and just do a 2D thing. Somebody also mentioned
Yeah.
that Godot might be going in that direction. I'm not sure if that's the direction they're going or not, but it'll be
No,
interesting
no.
to see.
There's a lot of variables that have to be solved there. In Roblox, I don't know how many hundreds of millions they're in now.
Oh
They're
yeah.
12 years in, and they're seeing substantial amounts of revenue. But they just raised their G round, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, they raised 150 million, something like that.
Yeah, and and they've they've two things. They've identified a target audience in the you know I, the tweens basically, um, where they have a lot of free time, right? And so there have been kids that have made hundreds of thousands. I think even a couple that made $1 million or so in revenue off of the games that they built.
User generated content. Yeah.
So so there was definitely, and that was kind of inspired again by Minecraft, and then but the way to monetize on the back end, even like with Second Life, where people were able to sell the patterns that people would then build content off of and almost get a royalty off the patterns.
Right.
That kind of DNA to the ecosystem is really crucial when your thing may not tip on your game, but it could be something that gets used in somebody else's game, and then it tips based on further down the road.
Now in the game,
and I think that's why I think blockchain and
right.
crypto makes sense. Is that you can have that if it gets used again, then you can have an ID that allows you to get compensated for.
That's something that's very compelling. That now you and I had both veered off into blockchain for a while, and
yep.
that was one of the earliest ideas that I had thought of was, wouldn't it be great if we could do intellectual property management and royalties on blockchain, so that anytime this asset appears anywhere, right, inside, hey, just use this wherever you want, right? It's Star Wars, whatever. Use Star Wars wherever you want. And it's on a blockchain, so everywhere it goes, if it's making money, you get something back from it. So is the game that you were talking about, it's an Ethereum blockchain, Ethereum based?
Yeah, it's built on Ethereum. You're actually spending, small amounts of Ethereum to buy assets in it. And,
okay.
And it's still really early, but yeah, it's an interesting.
The sandbox, right?
Yeah, because I've at different conferences have panel discussions with people, and heck, Richard Garriott was off selling land, and there's been a lot of different experiments kind of going in putting a token behind the assets, and I think that's an interesting component. Like the Decentraland, is a platform for that. There's a number of others that have been out there trying to figure out the mechanics of that. But again, the challenge is, how do you not just build a platform for sales, but actually build something that's compelling and fun,
right,
that people want to contribute to? And that's the magic, that again, if it was just adding engineering, all of us game developers who know how to build systems would solve it. But
we'd all be Miyamoto.
It's getting that fun factor that really does engage a community, and I think that's where it's really easy to take your eye off the ball as to who you're trying to create a great play experience for, and even with sequels and other game experiences you have where you're trying to innovate and add something new to it, but you can't lose the essence of what the actual fun of it was, or you lose all of your loyal community members who
right,
this isn't the game I want to play.
Yeah.
And it's a very hard balancing act to have. And I think again, blockchain or any of these systems, it's a way to enable those types of network effects to happen, but it doesn't actually guarantee they're going to. You still have to have the right experience.
See,
and
I keep thinking about this with regard to streaming. So I don't know if you've seen, I'm starting to pump Stream SDK on, LinkedIn and Twitter and whatever. So I've been working on a streaming technology now for like 8 years, basically. But I started just wanting to create a video chat for Unity because I wanted to make an app called Handheld Handyman that I had pitched at a startup competition. I actually started working on the technology just before because I knew I was going to do it.
Honestly, I thought I was going to need to download to just do this, this podcast, so that we were doing it inside.
In Stream SDK. No, I have not forcing that on people yet. If I ever did that, I would just set up a.
At some point, that's the kind of functionality you're looking for. Is that kind of.
We could do it. Yeah. We could do it, but I'd have to build an app and then give you and download the app. And I knew you probably already had Skype, and I already had Skype. But yes, we could certainly do this.
We're not. Again, it's how do you create? Because in VR. There's this whole push to how do you get to, having a conference environment where you have your avatars, etc., and there's all this stuff about being emotionally connected to the communication queue and all those sorts of things that challenge doing something in 3D that are coming, but the telepresence piece is going to be enabled by some type of game engine type technology because you need to have that ecosystem around you in order to interact with an environment. And I've watched guys starting to go that direction. There's one guy that he's got the Hero engine now. And he's doing Smart City, and he's actually doing all the geometry like you would with Google Earth inside of the Hero engine. Nice. For Smart City, so that everything is in that 3 space that you can experience.
Right.
And actually, I met him in Dubai at a blockchain conference, and we'd met years ago before, but he kind of taken the Hero engine to another level, and I think that's the kind of thing that if we can figure out, and again, streaming is just an enabling technology. It isn't the delta, I think, that's going to make it, good or a bit better, or something that feels native. I think that's the challenge. Is you get into a lot of these environments, and it may not be exactly what you're trying to create with your tool set, but it has to feel natural. It has to feel like, okay, this is an extension of the experience I want to have, and we certainly haven't gotten there yet.
I mean, to me, the thing is, you're taking these experiences that were built to be run off the computer right in front of you, and you're stuffing them in a data center. That's what most people are doing. So what I've been trying to do, and I'm trying to get people in the PixelFest community to think this way, or anybody else, that is, watching this, really. Basically, how can we take the streaming technology and create a new type of experience? Because when I think about the video game industry, the technology and the experiences usually go hand in hand. Seldom have we taken prior experiences and then tried to just, or maybe we've done this, but it doesn't seem like it works out that well to take a prior experience and then just stuff it in new technology. You wouldn't take Tribes and stuff it on a mobile phone. You know what I mean? Just because a mobile phone's the new technology, you wouldn't take that old game and put it there. No, the best games that were on mobile were games that were designed for mobile. So when it comes to streaming, the point that's been in my mind over the last few years, I wrote one article for Gama Sutra called Hyper-Exclusive Content. So the idea was, well, why can't I make a game that's only ever run off of one server, one time, and say something, take something like Super Mario Brothers. Imagine I pick up the game, I'm playing it, and then when I die, I'm never able to join that game again, but you are next in queue, you take over at that point. And so it becomes this game where one person takes over, when they die, the next person takes over, so on and so forth, until you reach the end of whatever that content is. But essentially, it means that the life that you have in that game is much more precious to you, just like reality. Now, all of a sudden, there's a different emotional component to it, and it's something that it strikes me could be achieved using streaming, because in any other context, the game can be duplicated, the game can be hacked, the game can be, you're distributing the content of the game. In this case, because the content of the game never leaves the server, and it's only ever streamed, it gives you this ability to sort of control the supply and demand of it, and then what can I do by controlling the supply and demand, and how can I create actually new experiences using streaming? So that's just one example. There are, I think, several others.
Yeah, no, and that parallels what I've been thinking. We've for a long time have had game AI, and you're playing against these NPCs in the game, and I keep thinking now as we've got neural nets and machine learning and all the pieces that we're figuring out. What about taking this shared experience we're having and creating something that's truly unique that we can play against in the cloud space? Because now it can be dynamic and it can be evolving, not so much based on generating content that way, but generating a play experience that way. And I think there's something that as we move forward, there's going to be new player experiences like that you can only have really experienced that in its existential moment, as it were.
Yes.
You can't actually re-experience that same thing, but it's still fun, even though it may be different for each person or different for each play time that you get to have in it. And I think there's something there that we're going to be able to break through on, both technologically and I think experientially, where we're going to find there's a way, and I don't think it's necessarily location-based gaming or any of those individual pieces of it, but where we actually have a new way to interact with each other that just changes. I mean, we've seen some of those. Anytime we can commercialize it in the MOBA space or any of the esports components now, but there's going to be a new gaming experience that happens that just takes us to a place where we couldn't have gotten there except through these advances that we're having in technology.
Right. Now, the neural net piece is very interesting. You're right, because as that net gets trained, it changes it fundamentally. I mean, it's not a static piece anymore. It's fully dynamic, and you're right. It changes the whole. That could change the whole experience of it as well. I mean, for my part, I'm just thinking about the streaming space as like, man, there's so many people that are trying to do streaming, and they keep trying to do the same thing. Hey, let's take the games that you have and stuff them in this data center. Don't you want to play them now? And it's like, people are like, well, the game now just has latency, and now I'm playing the game that I might normally be playing on a PC on a mobile phone, which again just reduces the resolution of experience. Every one of those steps is a reduction in the resolution of experience, not an increase in the it's not a new experience. It's just a reduction in resolution of experience. So how's that a value proposition?
It's interesting because I was reading an article today where David Reed, who's now I remember when we licensed our stuff to GameTap, he was doing the first subscription model.
Yes, I remember that guy. Yeah.
Splitting the revenue, and so the more titles they licensed, the less each individual developer would get. And they were trying to do it based on the amount of time played and all the kind of stuff that Arcadia and others are working on now. And the challenge is that particular business model doesn't necessarily work. And he was just describing this because the backlist doesn't hold up. It's not like the games that we played 10 years ago, like what we have with movies and music, have the same entertainment experience that's compelling as the frontline new stuff that's coming out, because the technology moves fast enough. It's hard to stay competitive with older titles. It's not that there isn't still fun there, and
only Tetris.
There's no reason to go back and play some of those, but they don't all hold up. And that's true of movies probably more than music in some cases. But again, it's a business model that like you're saying with the streaming space, doesn't necessarily fit the opportunity to change the experience and have a greater play experience based on the technology versus just a new business model.
Yeah.
And I think I agree. I think that we're looking at it as a delivery mechanism, and I had a streaming company that I bled on for about 8 years called BitRaider, and we delivered Star Wars: The Old Republic. At the time, I think it was a 60 gigabyte game, and we were able to get it to people in 10 gigs total. And you'd start playing the game long before the gamer was ever on your local drive.
Right.
But you needed to have it there to be able to execute it on your processor. Now, when you're looking at not just streaming, but you're looking at cloud computing, where we're actually doing a lot of the actual running of the game in the cloud, as well as
the whole game is run in
delivery.
The cloud, or on another computer somewhere.
Yeah, but how many people? I mean, we're looking at xCloud right now, and I don't see a lot of titles taking advantage of that functionality yet. It's still. I mean, I kept thinking Amazon, with what they're doing with Lumberjack and the rest, was gonna be able to tap into that ecosystem and create something unique, and I'm still not seeing evidence that we've really broken open the technology to do what you're trying to do. I think it's an important component. It's going to be one of those things when we look back, we're going to say, "Oh, that was easy."
Yeah.
but on this side of the innovation, there's still a lot of heavy lifting to get that experience.
It's going to be an interesting one to watch. I feel, I think good about the way that I think about it. Feels right, and when I look at a lot of the way that other people have approached it, it seems obviously wrong to me. Now the question is, who's actually going to be the one who gets that proper execution? Somebody's going to do it.
The killer app, right?
Yeah.
And that's it's. I've lived through it so many times in my technology life. Where Windows, knocked out DOS, and I was at the time the head of marketing for Oakley Publishing, which came out with Programmer's Journal, and we had about 33,000 just like really loyal developers that were on there, and Michael Abrash actually wrote a column for us every month.
Oh, that is awesome, man.
Used it to build his book line at the time, and I remember him calling because we'd sell T-shirts and his books in the back of the magazine, and he'd call to see if he made his rent, because he'd take a bunch of, instead of upfront royalties, he'd take a bunch of books and ship them to our warehouse, and we'd sell them, and that was how he made more money off his books than anybody else was at the time.
Huh.
And I got to meet guys like Bill Gates and those guys back in the day.
Right.
And then they decided with the next version of the C compiler to just put all the advertisers in our magazines functional content into the compiler itself, and knocked out the entire industry. And you look at these moments where you see these innovations happen, and what makes them dominant in a market. Sometimes it's just being the better solution, because there is no word perfect to compete against Word anymore.
Right.
And again, not to say that's where you're headed, but I think the challenge is to create an ecosystem where you can let innovators flourish on the platform, and like you're doing with PixelFest, just that whole community, get them thinking about it together, because that's how innovation really does, Tim.
Yeah, communities, people working together, and but they have to be thinking big. I feel like that's the big challenge with what we're doing here.
And then you got to get something done. So
right.
It's this, and you see it right now. And I'm watching Amazon just annihilate all of these open source communities, because they just do the same thing. And it's very difficult for me when I see, that was a small business, and they just got taken out without being even acquired,
right?
Because they just put the technology into AWS, and I think there's that sort of competitive piece of it. But how do you create that ecosystem that creates the success that gives you a little bit of immunity to that?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's crucial, because as you and I have done our entrepreneuring work, being able to get something that's defensible for funding is crucial. Just knowing that you're going to be able to get a profit off of it before somebody knocks it off in China.
Yes, that's the technology business, right? Is you're always in a race to try to acquire some degree of value, that whether or not you're going to create an operational business out of that's profitable, or whether you're going to create a piece that is necessary somewhere else, or you're at least going to create a piece that is some type of probable threat to some other piece that somebody's doing and they want to acquire it that way. But it's got to be kind of one of those three things, right? It has to be competitive in some fashion where it can't just be wiped out, right?
I'm biting my tongue because I'm in a startup right now
right.
where we believe we've got those components where we've actually got the patents filed, so we're fairly protected. So it's not like I can't talk about it. But we took that system object model that was the core behind Smalltalk and OS2 and even Next operating system, and we've applied it to blockchain.
Nice.
So now what you can do is actually build all of the extensible technology. We call it the XBOM, the extensible blockchain object model, and leverage all the classes and objects in the system that are running on the blockchain. So you're not actually running a separate smart contract. You're running the code that's actually on the blockchain, and it can have all the regulatory compliance built into it. It can have all of the pieces that are necessary for a supply chain to be able to be not brittle, because as soon as you write a smart contract right now, and if anything changes, you got to start over, right?
Right.
And we use the illustrations like every time we want to write a Word document, you have to write Word again, to be able to build those libraries to run the smart contract.
Right.
Why not have all of that running on the blockchain? And actually, we're at my business partners right now are in Phoenix at the Hyperledger Linux Foundation conference, and we're showing off the blockchain object model running on Hyperledger. So it works. We've got proof.
That is awesome.
And yeah, it's one of those. It's just like you're saying. It's like it enables a whole another thing, or IBM could consider it a threat, but it just makes all of the other blockchain exponentially more cost effective to develop on.
Right.
Time to market, fast to fail, all those pieces really come into play there. And that's, for us, something where we needed it because we couldn't see a way to get, until we had the assets on the blockchain in our accounts running and working, that we could actually get the sharding to work for scalability. Right. Otherwise, you're always running and you have the chance of a double spend situation. And here now we can shard because it's all inside the accounts, and the accounts can be on separate shards and running in parallel. So we get the ability to do full parallel installation with it as well. And that was a key for us.
Very intriguing.
So yeah, I'm excited. To be honest, it's the hardest thing I've ever done in terms of trying to explain a very technical thing to the business community, because it's almost a developer-centric kind of technology.
It really is.
Once you get the aha moment and you go, oh, why wouldn't you do it that way? Then it's a case of now we just have to start building out proof of concepts on it.
Right. When you use that example of, well, I have to write Word before I can write a Word document, is that what you use in high-level discussions all the time? Seems like a really great example.
We tried it. I mean, what's interesting is we started that illustration much more complex, because we were like going, well, if you look at this, it's like having a Google Sheets or a spreadsheet, and instead of just having the rows and columns, you actually have the other dimensions of all the other objects that you can access there.
Right.
And that illustration took longer to explain the illustration for people to understand what we were talking about. But yeah, I think that's extensibility and reusability functions of object-oriented programming languages. And I think that's the bigger challenge, is everybody thinks, oh, it's a programming language for blockchain. No, it's a system object model for blockchain. You can write in any programming language you want.
Right.
You're just using the objects that are actually, in the class trees and with all the inheritance on the blockchain. So, you actually get the extensibility for it in a way where now you don't have to go out and write those objects again in your code each time. And I think that's, hopefully people have that epiphany and can see that for their development environment, because right now it's very difficult to find blockchain developers who aren't really close to the metal and understand polyglot languages to know even why something is working in a good smart contract.
Is it something that's working in Ethereum, or is this how many different?
We've written it for Hyperledger Fabric. We're going to license it to enterprise at this point. It's a building block of our own proprietary blockchain architecture.
Okay.
Has another 7 patents behind it. But it was the one thing that we knew we could take to other blockchain environments and show the commercial value of it. In other words, how can we bootstrap $100 million infrastructure play for a full stack blockchain by just leveraging the really differentiating piece of it.
Right.
And that's what we've come up with.
How do you look at blockchain being used for anything other than a currency with decentralized mining? Because this is very interesting to me. How since I got into the Bitcoin business, I've had people approach me, people from Wall Street, that they want to use it for, to verify trades and all sorts of things where it's not actually a decentralized process. It's really just a database. And so
exactly, and when you look at it may be decentralized in the sense that, like with Hyperledger, it's a permission system, so everybody has to have rights on the blockchain, and it's interesting because there's a lot of philosophical, almost religious discussions that happen between permission and permissionless as to whether they're truly decentralized, etc. But the key is the trustworthiness without having human interaction. And when I look at the big picture, and this sounds naive, but I honestly believe that the intelligences that we're building today are going to need blockchain as a mechanism to be able to do the transactions in the future. So for us to be able to take advantage of the less friction in the marketplaces that these intelligences are going to enable, we're going to have a way we can have a trustless system to enable that. So blockchain is a building block, I think, in the larger economies that we're going to be able to create. And I felt that way even when I was working on gaming expressions. And I think that the challenge for me when I look at where we're at now, which is, my gosh, it's not even Blitz Basic, right? It's
right.
We're so early in the tool set, the way we're approaching blockchain in terms of the mining piece of it, and the scalability, and a whole bunch of those components of it. But they're extremely complex, ivory tower almost challenges in computer science. But as we start to break through those pieces, I think we're going to see, really large scale sea changes in how we are able to build and deploy technology. And is it a database? Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Can we know that it's trusted data in and trusted data out and has no vulnerabilities to man-in-the-middle attacks? All of those pieces that we need to truly be secure enough that even if it is decentralized and scalable, that we know it's not going to be hacked. Those are the hard pieces that still have to be completely solved. And that I've stayed up a lot of nights now trying to figure out how to explain those things as we start to build this thing out to market, because I can almost grok them myself, almost get my head around them, but
right.
Not enough to be able to sit down and make it make sense to a non-technical person.
I haven't been paying that much attention to blockchain Bitcoin since maybe early 2018. The company that I co-founded, Because, raised $65 million. We built the biggest mining facility in North America. It's out here in Virginia Beach. And the company, unfortunately, though, had to end up at a court order, bankruptcy. They filed a Chapter 11. Somebody in the company made a mistake, signed somebody on as a secured creditor that shouldn't have been. Case went to court. the judge ruled
Yep.
you've got to liquidate to pay this person, and that was the end of the story for that. Which was the idea behind that company was that, well, if we're going to have this, if we're going to have cryptocurrency, you've got to be able to trade options on it. So the real end goal of that
Yep.
company was to be trading options on Bitcoin. Um,
Well, and you know, Overstock with there has been a lot of people trying to get those types of asset trades to happen and be regulatory compliant. I mean, that's
yeah, that was the tricky thing.
If you've just looked at Libra, you see the amount of heat that's brought, and they're just trying to, you know, they're just trying to find a way to enable transactions. You know, I see that. Yeah, it's a threat to the existing systems that are out there, but it's the future of those as well. So, you know, as we're sitting down with the commodities trading group and the Malta group with the EU, and looking at what their regulatory compliance pieces are and how to build that into our object model, so that you know that as we build this out, we can stay in compliance with different jurisdictions around the planet. Then crypto has a much better chance of being able to be adopted without the fear of it getting shut down somehow. Not that you're going to shut down Bitcoin or anything, but the ability for somebody to make a mistake, whether it's an exchange level mistake or vulnerability to hackers, etc., but be able to have it fully compliant all the way through. It's a huge piece, and you know, there's a lot of moving parts. So that's where, once again, building a community around the technology is really going to be important for us as we move forward. I want to make sure that we have these fundamental components that are allowing us to generate some revenue, so we're not having to always do it on futures. Because I think that's, for monetary policy purposes, one of the problems with crypto is that they really don't have the governance that they need to have to be well governed, basically.
Right.
And so, you know, you're just a speculative value. It's not really based on transaction value in the ecosystem. And those are easy words to say. They're very hard to get to a place where you get to those network effect tipping points where those things become true.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's in mining piece or in the governance piece. Right?
The real thing of it though is, and a lot of people believe this to be true. I personally am not sure. It would be great if somebody could explain to me why, but can blockchain really be separated from Bitcoin? And since we're diving off into blockchain and Bitcoin, I mean, the blockchain was created so that you could have this sort of permissionless system, this currency in Bitcoin. I forgot, somebody said you can't even call it a currency, but we'll call it a currency for right now. But that system is there.
It's a medium of exchange, which is the definition.
So that you can, you say medium of exchange, but that is there so that anybody can start up a miner and start verifying transactions, and and basically everybody's transactions are stored all around the world, so it's extremely safe, and it'd be basically impossible to destroy the record of those transactions. But once you get outside of that type of system, then what really is the value of blockchain? Because the value of it is the permissionless. You set up a miner. That miner, is there to verify transactions, which provides security for the network. Like, if all of a sudden I take that blockchain and I'm like, hey, we're going to use that for our business right now, all of a sudden as a database, well, now anybody can go ahead and, the really important piece about this for people that don't understand is that it's not hackable, because what you're doing is you're using all the processing power of the PC or of your computer to basically create these, using hashing power. So it's not like you can brute force it. And then the idea is that you've got all these computers around the world doing it, and in order to make a fraudulent transaction, you would have to have more brute force power than 50% of the world's computers that are on this network. So you need a 51% attack in order to do it. And even at that, it would be difficult. But it makes so much sense in that context.
You're in the consensus algorithm portion of the blockchain functionality, and that's with Bitcoin, it's built on proof of work, based on doing the computational work. Now we're trying different models like proof of stake. The difficulty is the attack vector on that is that if somebody somehow, through whatever, is able to get the private keys, it may be holding somebody's gun to somebody's head in order to compromise the system. Now proof of stake can break down in terms of the 51% attack vector. And what we've believed is that you do have to have that proof of work as a fundamental, but we've done a hybrid proof of stake in order to do the staking nodes, so that those people are compelled to contribute to the network because of their self-interest in being part of it. So you get the security of the proof of work combined with the efficiency of the proof of stake, and then that actually allows us with our sharding architecture to get the parallelization to happen, so that now it's exponentially less, so that we run at the speed of the potential physics of the network in terms of throughput. By adding, as more resources are added, we're able to do the parallel component of it. At that point, the cost of the electricity to run the computations starts to go down by orders of magnitude, because we're making that hybrid work as more resources get added to the network. So
basically, you can reduce can you eliminate proof of work, or just greatly reduce proof of work?
You're greatly scale proof of work, so the number of transactions is so much higher in terms of throughput, using the same amount of computing power as what would be required to do a much smaller number of transactions. So it's again, Mr. Marketing here, trying to explain this to people.
This was always a problem with this space. It's so esoteric.
Yeah. Oh, and I listen to these guys that are the geniuses that are designing and architecting this, and I understand it while they're talking. But then for me to go try and have this conversation, I'm sure people are listening to me going, "This guy doesn't know what he's talking about." I'm not and actually, I think those are some of my best works at Garage Games, when I get up on stage and talk about the new features that we were adding to the game engine, because I wasn't a programmer, so I'd explain it in marketing speak, and that was very entertaining for all.
Now, you were always a good speaker. I always enjoyed it when you got up and talked. So definitely.
Well, the one thing I look back at, and I've seen some of the videos, and it still kind of has the hair on the back of my neck go up, is that I'd say things like, remember this time and the fun that we're having now making independent games.
Yes.
Because it may never be better than this. This could be the moment. And in some ways, it was historically that kind of a breakthrough when Xbox Live Arcade flew from Amsterdam with the Xbox 360s, and they showed up in Eugene, Oregon.
I was there.
Under we couldn't have any press there that would be able to talk about it until it was out from under embargo.
Right.
And yet all of us independent developers got to play on the Xbox 360.
Got to play Geometry Wars there
before anybody else.
Yes.
Got their hands on them.
Got to meet
that was a moment where it felt like, okay, we're on console. We're bringing games to market that wouldn't have any other way to market in terms of the kind of play experience that they were. Because they were console titles, and we got to do it by just the brute force of a community of people that believed we could do it. And good stuff.
Oh, it was magic, and people today probably won't appreciate it, but back then, we as independent developers thought that it was going to be impossible to make console games, which I think a lot of folks like myself, that was the dream. We were making calculator games or PC games just as a way to finally get onto a console, And I think the first time that it really became possible that I was made aware of was at this, I think this was IGC 2005. And,
Yep.
Greg Canessa created Xbox Live Arcade, and he flew in and spoke to us all, and I got to play Geometry Wars there. It was epic. It was it was an incredible event. Had so much fun.
And,
oh my gosh.
and I think that there are moments in everybody's careers where you look back and you go, okay, that was a great milestone. And I think the thing I keep looking at is where's the next set of magic coming from? And I think you put your thumb on a really important piece. Is how do we take the experience of a streaming experience? It's not just a data center delivering bits across the network.
Yeah.
It's how do we make that shared experience be something that transcends what we could do. And in some ways, I think this circles right back to the blockchain, because you're looking at the true network computer that's running content around the planet and is hosted on these mining nodes. And now that the blockchain's running that way, there isn't anything that a particular government could do to stop it, because it's not under their parlance. And if we can do that in a way that it benefits humanity, I do think it can be part of the solution, not part of the problem with climate change and the rest of it. We can actually start to solve some really important problems with this architecture. And it's not just supply chain stuff, which is what I've been spending the last, like whether it's automotive or organic food, etc. But it's good to have that kind of ability to trust that this is somehow certified and authentic. But at the end of the day, it's also how can we do more together than we can apart? And I think that's where there's this community effect that really does come into play, whether it's in video games or in blockchain communities. It's a matter of we want to create a new way to experience life, and we're going to do it hopefully safely. And I've read too many AI books to think we're going to win, but until we find a way to get to parallel or parity and get Asimov's rules engaged.
That was the thing I always loved about the blockchain community, though, is that focus on decentralization. That idea that anybody can go in and get a miner or get 10 miners or 100 miners or whatever, contribute to the network and just sort of jump on. It's very it didn't just belong to one group or company or whatever. It was everybody around the whole world contributing to this, which was really interesting.
We're building our foundation in Switzerland and all that so that we can basically open source this technology to the planet. But we've got to build it first, and to do that we have to be able to at least take this like enterprise building block that we're doing and get there. But yeah, it's a challenge, and you're seeing a lot of altcoins and cryptos that are no longer having utility because nobody's using them because of the scalability and some of the other issues that are out there. And it's great while you've got everybody believing, but you have to be able to get to that commercial point where you're really taking it to the next level. And I'm still almost as excited as I was the first time I heard about Ethereum when it was first coming out, about what its potential for being able to change the way we do business around the planet. It's just there's a lot of moving parts that I didn't really have any understanding of. Now I still feel like I get about 50% of it, and the rest of it I believe the white papers are true at some level.
Yeah. No, it's a very tricky subject. There's truth there and there's untruths there. I mean, a lot of people started calling Bitcoin digital gold, and that is not true because
but the store of value, because it became speculated in so much, it wasn't good for transactions.
Yeah.
If you paid one Bitcoin for a pizza today, it could be worth $20,000 tomorrow. But that's a lot for a pizza.
The other thing about that, though, right, is it's not like gold, because if people don't start using the network for transactions, eventually it's not gonna be valuable because nobody's gonna be protecting it, because nobody's gonna be mining it. right? So
Well, and
that's
we're
very
about
different
to,
than gold.
yeah, we're about to come up with another half-life in terms of the, in May here,
Yeah.
and everybody says that's going to drive values up. Well, I keep going, well, yeah, we can fragment it and start spending smaller amounts, but if the value is driven by speculation and continues to raise to the point it is, it just isn't going to be used for commerce. And then, what is its utility? And again, everybody keeps going back to that store of value, but I was the guy up on stage talking about poppies, and no, not poppies.
Oh, over in Holland.
Tulips.
Tulips,
sorry.
yeah.
Wrong flower. Yeah, poppies are good too, just for something else. But no, for tulips, where everybody believed they were worth something, and they're buying and selling houses with them and everything else until they weren't. And that's the ability to have, a shared value. Obviously, once it gets to a critical mass and enough people have a self-interest in it, it's harder to take the value down. Yeah. But we've seen those kind of corrections happen. But Ethereum's in one right now, and again, you have to believe that there's utility there that's really gonna answer a long-term.
Ethereum seems to have a little bit more utility, but at the same time, it's like, how programmable do you want your currency to be? I think that's an interesting question. It's like currency at a root level has to be very simple.
Again, that's a crypto with the ability to use it for transactions, and opening up the smart contract, right, so that we can do more sophisticated commerce on top of the blockchain. That's an interesting piece of the equation. The challenge, though, is like, EOS came along, and a bunch of the developers that were on Ethereum moved over there because somebody was paying to it. And I've seen that now with some other migrations that have happened. And I don't have those answers. I do have my belief that you've got to get to a certain level of ubiquity where you've got enough of the market share that you've got a little bit of insurance against that. But you look at what we consider fiat currencies today, and you don't have to go back more than 100 years, and those didn't exist. So the fact that we believe that the dollar is worth something, and that all of those are shared belief. Now, of course, rule of law and military might and a bunch of other things kind of back up the monetary policy. But it's again, what is going to be those types of agreements that we have between us in the future? I think when I look at like carbon footprint and some of those issues, if it could get expressed right in a blockchain crypto environment, I think there'd be a lot of people who want to adopt it because they want to see that economy succeed, and that's an interesting purpose-driven, not profit-driven motive for people participating in an economy. Yeah,
well, I think you got to go purpose-driven for sure. I mean, that's really what it's all about. I think that was the success of Garage Games. It sounds like it's going to be the success of what you're working on now.
I mean, the whole idea, the reason we're working on this is because we were working on smart cities and wanting to make it so there weren't all these siloed data systems, and there was a secure way to exchange the data so that we didn't have a bunch of dumb systems making up smart cities. So we started there with our message server architecture, and then we realized, if we're going to be able to exchange this data, we need to have a blockchain architecture behind it that allows us to have those kind of data markets in place. And that one thing led to another. The naive point when we raised our first round was the idea that, well, somebody must have a scalable blockchain out there. We just haven't found it yet. No. And then we went through everybody's white papers and found that no, still not there yet.
EOS was trying very hard by ditching the proof of work. I think they have run into a lot of issues with their proof of stake, though. And I remember listening to that guy. He's pretty popular around here because he was a Virginia Tech guy. I forgot his name at the moment. But so here in Virginia, he's popular. But I remember watching the threads, even with the founder.
I know another one of the promoters, the marketing guy, Brock Pierce from his
Yes,
years
Brock
of
Pierce.
gaming.
Yes, of course. That guy was all over the place. Well, the Puerto Rico thing. But
Yeah.
when you looked at, there was actually a debate.
I was at that conference.
You were down there. Nice. Way to go.
Yep.
When you look at that thing, though, there was even a debate back and forth where, oh gosh, I can't remember his name now, but basically somebody on the Bitcoin side was like, listen, if we have to explain to you why you need proof of work, you really don't understand this, and he was just like, well, I don't understand why I need proof of work. I can just hash these things, and the hashes are all going to prove, the blockchain. But I think sort of neglecting the fact that yes, a manipulation could occur there, which relegates back to the previous hash, and doesn't necessarily go forward. It just and also at that point, yes, it's not permissionless, certainly, and then whoever controls the staking system has power. Essentially, you sort of recreated the central banking system, right?
You've re-centralized decentral.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's again on the governance model as to who has control, and whether you're the World Bank or the group of people that are putting the governance behind this. Again, I think the challenge is balancing what you call the triumvirate, the ability to have the scalability, the security, and the decentralization.
Right.
All, and everybody keeps saying, well, you can have two of any of those three. You have to have all three of them to truly have a balanced currency and ecosystem, and that hasn't been done yet. So, there are certainly consensus algorithms that work that aren't Bitcoin, but they have their vulnerabilities on the security side, right?
That was the thing I always worried about from the moment that I heard about Bitcoin. Reading an article back in 2010 or something like that, it was like, what? Yep. This is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. This is never going to work. I'm sure somebody came up with an algorithm. They think that algorithm is going to be protected. Somebody's going to figure out how to hack it. And it was finally like 2013 when I finally sat down and read like the tech spec of the whole thing. But I was immediately a fan of proof of work. And pretty much any other system, I was like, seems hackable.
Well, now we've got all these proofs of you name it.
Right.
And I think that, again, I agree you can't get away from the security that's brought by proof of work.
Yeah.
There isn't a solution to that. Even with all of Lightning and everything else that's been done to Bitcoin, there still isn't a way to get that truly parallel. It's chartable in this sense.
No scalability though. Yeah.
And that's the next piece is the team I'm working with helped build the IP stack for the internet, so they've deployed some fairly large systems, the high-speed IP stack, and understand how these networks work in the wild, not just in theory. And the amount of contention and traffic and issues that you run into when you start to try and add sharding to like Ethereum, it really has some fundamental challenges that are not, we're not there yet. So, right now, we haven't, we haven't really pushed on our consensus piece of it because, we're going to build that over time, but we certainly have protected it so that we know when it is time that we can execute against it.
Is there something that you can share with people, or that you want to share, other than just the experience of working on this new blockchain technology that hopefully solves this sort of trifecta of issues?
Well, I think it's been a theme through their entire conversation, and that's and I'm watching it even in the political scenarios that we're running into right now. It's building the community behind the organization that you're trying to get votes for, etc. And whether I agree with him or not, Bernie's done a great job of getting a competitive group of believers versus the Trump scenario, and you have to have that kind of agreement in a group of people to really make a difference.
Right.
And I think that's that's where the magic is when you can get enough people with a shared purpose. And this is true no matter what company you're starting. If everybody really believes in the shared purpose, you can change the world. I mean, Elon Musk just keeps knocking off companies that way. But again, I think that's there's a book I was just finishing up called Blitzscaling, and a lot of it's about shared purpose and being able to get that network effect to happen, because everybody feels like their own self-interest is fulfilled by participating in the community. And,
Absolutely.
I think that's. I mean, that's not necessarily anything that's self-plugging of myself, but I spent quite a bit of time focusing on what are the characteristics that make a healthy community, and it was like 18 vectors,
right.
for how people get self-actualized in it, how people get recognition, and the way different personalities want to contribute and be part of that healthy ecosystem. And I was always the odd man out, because I was always like the marketing guy coming into a bunch of technologists and trying to assist with getting everybody underneath that.
I want to say something about that.
Shared belief system.
So here, where we are in Hampton Roads, I have felt for the whole time I've been engaged in our startup community that there is not enough technological talent, right? Like, we're lacking in regards to how technical people are. And I just want people to realize that this conversation is probably the second, or might even be the most technical conversation we've had, and I'm having it with the marketing guy. Okay, I just want people to realize this is the marketing guy from Garage Games and the marketing guy behind. Now, and what is the new company called? Can we?
Prosaga is the name of the company.
Prosaga. Okay, so this is
Prasaga. So, yeah.
Prosaga. Okay.
Prosaga. Yeah, and it's all things connected is kind of the if we cobble together the right Sanskrit.
Right.
But that's where it came from, is the belief that we can do things through a connection that happens.
That's awesome. But yeah, I just want to put that out there, though, because I do. The big thing, if there was a mission-driven piece behind PixelFest, and we say growing through love of games, but I always felt that I was seeing people in the games industry, predominantly on the West Coast, for the most part, but they would come up through games, and then they would go on to tackle these incredibly complex technical challenges, and they would figure out how to get a lot of people to use them. And there's something about, no matter what game you make, sort of on the back end, it's very complicated. But nobody cares. They don't care how complicated it is. They just want to be able to sit down, play it, and start having fun in 3 seconds. So you have to be able to do all that technical piece, and you have to make it something that everybody can just use really fast. And that's how these giant scalable technologies are built. There's a certain skill set, and I think it's really based in games. I mean, that's where it comes from. That's my perspective on it. There's other people who have other perspectives.
And I go back to the network effect component of all this, because that's where scaling really happens, right? And what makes it viral and all that. And a lot of it's, like you said, it's the ease of use. It's the being able to share it with somebody else. And it's kind of fundamental of branding. I like the definition. It's what people say about you when you're not in the room. That's your brand. And I think if you can't explain it to somebody else, which, heck, we could just have this long conversation. Anybody listening to this who can give it back to me better than we just did, please. Jay at Prosaga.com, get in touch with me, because the difficulty is that how do you get this so it's shareable. I mean, it's so that people understand it, whether it's user-generated content or it's you see it now, even with kind of not as cleanly as it you'd like to have it be, but with like Airbnb and Ubers and that sort of thing, where I remember the first week Uber came out, I took one in San Francisco. I said, this is it. I don't have to rent town cars to take clients around to do PR pitches. Because we were all in limos. And it was like, this was magic. And you see that network effect where then everybody wants to share, and it becomes its own economy. And if you can find a way to leverage that piece of it, that's when you have, again, the same thing when a game comes out and everybody's talking about it, whether it's because a streamer they like streamed on it and now everybody's streaming on it kind of thing. However that virality happens, it really does require having something that people want to share, and that they see their own self-interest or fun in it, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's, getting back to where you're at, where your streaming piece is, getting enough people that are, going to be purpose-driven, but also, you got to make a living. So,
yep.
How am I gonna build the ability to stay focused on this?
How does that put money in my pocket while doing what I want to do? I think that is the ultimate question for sure.
Yeah, and to be honest, I don't think we ever really solved that piece of the, at least from the publishing side of indie games.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's become very fragmented now, but there's no easy go-to-market for independent titles. I mean, for a minute, Steam was there, but for PC titles, but and to a certain degree, the iOS piece had some virality in it.
iOS was nice for a while. There was like a 4-year period of time, 3 or 4 year period of time where it was really good. And then it got it got super saturated, and it got so cruffed up it was hard to find the quality, and that's again, like with Steam not being curated, there's just so much stuff to compete with that you can't rely on the distribution mechanism to be your marketing tool. Yep.
And I still think, just like we were talking about user-generated content, discoverability, and some of those pieces, those are going to be the differentiators for people who create those kind of commercial successes.
It kind of brings it back to word of mouth a little bit more too. I mean, it was nice
Absolutely.
when you could rely on the distribution channel to be your marketing piece. That's a really nice place to be. Although, at the end of the day, what really makes great products, or makes a product that's already great, what takes it and makes it successful, is usually word of mouth. So if it's great enough that somebody's going to bring it up in conversation, you're going to do well no matter what.
Well, and you experienced it with Nintendo, right? Because their third-party stuff would get some traction, but nothing like their first-party IP.
Yes.
That they really bled on to get it to that Nintendo quality brand. And we ran into that at Garage Games. We thought we found magic when we had Think Tanks, Orbs, and Marble Blast as our first 3 titles at IGC, and then struggled to find more titles that had that kind of depth of play experience. And not that there weren't some good titles, they just didn't have that and I don't. Some people say, well, those were all kind of veteran game developer designers that built those. Justin Benny, still a real close friend. Orbs was his, right after Myrmidon. That was the name of the. Myrmidon was their original, way out of scope. Going to take $20 million to build.
Right.
and they scrapped it to build Orbs, which was Mario meets golf kind of a thing.
Yeah, great game. Orbs is such a great game. I don't even know if they do anything with it anymore.
The last expression we played with it on a tablet, and we looked for a publisher for it, but never found the right portal for it, because it was a deeper.
I feel like it's a mouse game.
It really
though.
did have tournament play as part of its ecosystem.
Right.
So.
Man, I wonder if you could bring that back now. That game, because it definitely to me seems like a mouse-driven game. Like I thought about it on iOS, maybe using tilt controls.
It was tough to get it on touch to work. We spent a lot of time there. I don't know if we ever found the sweet spot, but we had it pretty close. It wasn't painful to play. Let me put it that way.
I used that game as a real confidence builder. In 2005, I was after Aerial Antics didn't do all that well, and I was trying to find what's going to work next. I made all sorts of crap just trying to figure out what went wrong, and I was like, all right, I'm going to go. I had this strange epiphany. I wrote about it on the Garage Games. Dot plans, that's what they were called. They were called dot plans, right?
Yeah, finally. Thank you.
And then you changed the name to blogs once everybody started doing blogs. But I had this crazy epiphany. But I wanted to get number one in some stuff. I was like, man, I really want to do some great stuff. And so I used Orbs as my jumping off point. I was like, I played this game Orbs, and the highest I ever got in the ranks was number 4. Oh no! Are you gone?
Yeah.
Oh, I can still hear you.
All right.
I can't see you, but I can hear you. And yeah, man, I sat there for. I'm trying to think how long I sat there. I played that game for like weeks straight until I got the number 1 rank worldwide in the game in like 2005.
It really was power up driven. If you didn't figure out how to leverage those power ups, you really couldn't get to that sweet spot.
Yeah,
of
and
really
it was all about chain. I mean, you had to in a row, right? You had to have unbroken streaks. That's how you would win that game. So you'd be very consistent, very precise. You'd get some players in there that were just jerks that would just to break your streak would take your star. You're so focused on the next one you're going to get, the next one
would knock you out.
Yeah. Oh
gosh. I never did anything like that.
Yeah. Man.
It was the spawn camping of Orbs.
Yes, it was. Oh my gosh. So frustrating because you knew that it meant nothing to the other person except to ruin your day. Woo!
Yeah. This was fantastic. I don't know if anybody will enjoy it as much as we did reminiscing and all, but I think that there's something there, especially in your entrepreneurial spirit and what you're trying to accomplish with the inspiration you're bringing to PixelFest. And I rarely get out to the East Coast for any conference. I think I've been to the East Coast Game Conference and I got down to the Atlanta one. This is kind of an MMO conference.
Oh man, I forgot the name of that one. That
Andrew puts together, and yet I've never been to PAX East, right? Because I've been asked to speak a number of times, but just one thing or another. So I was right in the middle of everything else going on. But I really think if everybody understands what we've talked about around community and can find a way to contribute to what you're building there, it doesn't have to just be the technologists that really move this thing to its full potential. And obviously with streaming, we can live anywhere and still contribute to a localized movement. So not everybody has to live next door. They can be wherever they're at on the planet.
That's right.
And, that's exciting. And I feel like now I do want to see what you're working in Unity on and see if I can get my head around it, because I think those kind of tools for building the collaboration environment are some of what keeps us from really enjoying true community right now. If we could have those tools to build more together, it's kind of like the Tower of Babel. If we all speak the same language,
right,
we can conquer almost anything. And there's definitely a piece of what you're doing there that I think is in that league of thinking. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on. You're one of the guests I knew when I started doing this at the beginning of the year. I was like, I want to get Jay Moore to be on the show. He's one of the people.
Thanks.
And I had messaged Jay on LinkedIn, but he's very popular on LinkedIn, and I think he had a lot of spam in his inbox, and he finally got to it. It took a while.
What was funny is, and I think I even saw it maybe go through. I thought, oh, Jerry, and I had a personal assistant in the Philippines that was dealing with that spam thing, because it was just so insane. I was getting 150 LinkedIn requests a day. It just and then everybody doing their pitch messaging behind it, so messages just got buried. But thankfully that kind of frothiness in the crypto space has gone away, because that was definitely all coming out of the.
Oh yeah,
Matter of fact, I like calling it blockchain because it doesn't have that stigma of being all the scammers.
That's a fair point. It's the sort of back end, the protocol, right?
The enterprise, it has to have functionality, it has to do something for us, it has to make the world a better place to live.
Right.
If it doesn't, then, what did we call it? Tulips.
Yeah. Well, so Prasaga is what you're working on. So
Yep,
best of luck with that.
working
It
on
sounds amazing, and I'm looking forward to chatting more, offline sometime. And, it's we have a long history, and obviously we
Yeah.
can talk for a long time because this is going to be the longest PixelCast we've ever had. We're at an hour and 50 minutes right now, but it's great. Thank you so much, Jay. I really appreciate you being on the show. You have certainly grown a lot through your love of games, and of course, as always, with PixelFest, let's all continue growing through love of games. Have a great night. Thank you.